If you are an INFJ who has ever wondered why broken people find you, why they stay, why they take and take until there is nothing left, this is your story. And it is time you understood not just what you are doing for them, but what it is doing to you. There is a story told of the wounded healer, the figure in myth, who carries their own scars yet cannot help but turn toward the suffering of others. They are drawn to the broken, the lost, the ones society turns away from, not out of naivety, but out of something deeper, something archetypal. The INFJ knows this story intimately, because they live it. But what happens when the healer forgets they too can bleed? What happens when the one who sees into the darkness of others loses sight of their own light? This is not a story of weakness or mistake. This is a story of a pattern, ancient and repeating, where the INFJ's greatest gifts become the very things that wound them. To understand why INFJs attract broken people, and how it hurts them, we must first understand the nature of the wound itself, the psychology of the healer, and the myth of the one who descends into the underworld to retrieve what others have lost. The INFJ does not simply encounter broken people by chance. They call them forth, through the very essence of who they are, through an invisible signal that says, "I see you, I understand you, I will not turn away." And in that signal lies both their power and their peril. The first sign is the INFJ's intuitive recognition of pain, a kind of second sight that sees beneath the surface of others, to the hidden wound, the unspoken trauma, the carefully constructed mask. Jung spoke of the shadow, that part of the psyche we deny, repress, and bury in the depths. Most people cannot see their own shadow, let alone another's. But the INFJ possesses what can only be described as shadow vision. They look at someone and perceive not just what is presented but what is concealed, not just the persona but the person beneath it, fractured and afraid. This is not a conscious process, not a deliberate scanning or analysis. It is intuitive, immediate, and often felt before it is understood. The INFJ meets someone and within moments, sometimes within seconds, they sense the brokenness, the places where this person has been shattered by life, by loss, by betrayal. And here is where the pattern begins. Because broken people recognize this recognition, they feel seen in a way they have never felt seen before, and it draws them in like moths to a flame. They do not arrive at the INFJ's door by accident. They come because something in them knows, at a level beyond words, that this person will not judge them, will not recoil from their darkness, will not demand they be whole before they are worthy of attention. The INFJ becomes a refuge, a sanctuary, the one person who looks into the abyss of another's pain and does not flinch. But what the INFJ often fails to realize, until it is too late, is that this gift of seeing is also a kind of invitation, a door left open that allows not just the wounded to enter, but the unwilling to heal, the addicted to chaos, the ones who seek not transformation but absorption. The second sign is the INFJ's deep empathy, not the shallow sympathy of polite concern, but the profound mirroring empathy that Jung described as participation mystique, a blurring of boundaries in which the INFJ does not just understand another's pain, but feels it as their own. This is empathy as immersion, as descent. The INFJ does not stand at the edge of someone's suffering and offer condolences from a safe distance. They step into it, wade into the depths of it, and allow it to wash over them. And in this act of radical emotional availability, they become the container for another's anguish. Broken people sense this capacity instinctively. They recognize that the INFJ will hold what they cannot hold themselves, will metabolize emotions they find too overwhelming, and will become the witness to experiences they cannot bear to look at alone. The INFJ becomes the therapist without credentials, the priest without a church, the one who listens at 3 in the morning when the darkness is too much to face alone. And they do this willingly, often gladly, because it aligns with their sense of purpose, their belief that their sensitivity is meant to serve something greater than themselves. But here is the trap, the place where the myth turns dark. In Greek mythology there is the story of Chiron, the wounded healer, a centaur struck by a poisoned arrow that never heals, yet he spends his life healing others. The INFJ is Chiron. They carry their own unhealed wounds, their own traumas and losses, yet they focus their energy outward, toward the suffering of others, and in doing so, they neglect the very wound that is slowly poisoning them. The empathy that allows them to hold space for broken people becomes the mechanism of their own depletion, because empathy without boundaries is not compassion but self-erasure. The third sign is the INFJ's belief in potential, their ability to see not just who someone is but who they could become, the person buried beneath the addiction, the trauma, the self-destruction. This is the INFJ's visionary quality, their future-oriented intuition that perceives the arc of transformation, even when there is no evidence of it in the present. They meet someone broken, and they do not see only the brokenness. They see the strength that could emerge from the struggle, the wisdom that could come from the pain, the beauty that lies dormant beneath the chaos. And this vision is genuine, not a delusion or a fantasy, but a real perception of human possibility. The problem is that broken people often use this vision as a substitute for actually doing the work of healing. They bask in the INFJ's belief in them, they draw strength from it, they let it sustain them, but they do not transform. They remain broken, comfortable in the role of the one who is seen, understood and believed in, without ever taking responsibility for their own repair. Nietzsche wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow." The INFJ offers broken people a why, a reason to believe they are more than their damage. Still, in offering this, they often become the reason, the sole source of hope and meaning. When the INFJ inevitably cannot carry that weight, when they need to turn away or focus on their own needs, the broken person collapses, or worse, turns on them, accusing them of abandonment, of betrayal, of not loving them enough. The INFJ becomes responsible not just for seeing potential, but for actualizing it in another, an impossible task, that was always impossible, but that the INFJ takes on anyway, because their entire identity is built on the belief that they can help, that they should help, that their purpose is to be the catalyst for another's awakening. The fourth sign is the INFJ's outsider identity, their sense of being different, misunderstood, and apart from the mainstream of human experience. This is not arrogance but alienation, a feeling that has followed them since childhood, the sense of watching life from behind glass, of understanding others without being understood themselves. Broken people are also outsiders, exiled from normalcy by their trauma, their addiction, their mental illness. They too feel they do not belong, that they are too damaged for ordinary love, too complicated for simple friendships. And in the INFJ they find someone who shares this exile, someone who will not try to drag them back into a world that rejected them, but will instead sit with them in the margins, in the shadows, in the places polite society refuses to go. There is a strange comfort in this mutual outsiderness, a sense of being understood by another exile, that creates a powerful bond, one that feels more authentic than the superficial connections most people settle for. But this bond is also dangerous, because it is built on a foundation of shared pain rather than shared growth, on recognition of woundedness rather than aspiration toward wholeness. The INFJ and the broken person become what Jung called a conjunctio, a psychological union. Still, it is a conjunctio of shadows, a merging of darkness rather than light, and it reinforces the very isolation and alienation that both are seeking to escape. The INFJ begins to believe that they are meant only for the broken, that their depth and complexity can only be appreciated by those who have suffered as they have. They withdraw further from healthier connections, from people who might challenge them to grow rather than understand them, and from relationships that might offer reciprocity rather than endless giving. The fifth sign is the INFJ's capacity for unconditional acceptance, their ability to witness another's worst self without withdrawing love or care. This is a rare and precious quality, rooted in the INFJ's understanding that behavior is not identity, that the person who lashes out in anger or retreats in depression is not defined by those moments, but is larger than them, more complex, capable of change. The INFJ has often spent a lifetime learning to accept their own contradictions, their own darkness, their own capacity for both profound goodness and deep selfishness, and this inner work gives them the ability to extend that same acceptance to others. Broken people desperately need this acceptance. They have been rejected, judged, and condemned by others, and by themselves. The INFJ's refusal to condemn them feels like grace, like salvation, like the first time they have been allowed to be fully human in all their messiness and contradiction. But here is where the hurt begins, because broken people often interpret unconditional acceptance as unconditional tolerance. They begin to test the boundaries to see how much they can take, how badly they can behave, how deeply they can wound the INFJ and still be accepted. And the INFJ, trained by their own psychology to forgive, to understand, to see the pain beneath the behavior, allows it. They make excuses for mistreatment, they rationalize cruelty, they absorb abuse, and call it compassion. They tell themselves that the broken person is suffering, that their lashing out is a defense mechanism, that underneath it all, they are good, and just scared. And all of this may be true, but it does not make the hurt less real, does not make the INFJ less damaged by the constant emotional violence they endure in the name of understanding. The sixth sign is the INFJ's addiction to depth, their inability to tolerate shallow connections or superficial engagement. They crave intensity, meaning, substance in their relationships, and broken people offer this in abundance. A relationship with someone broken is never dull, never surface level, never predictable. It is all late-night conversations about trauma and meaning, all emotional crises and profound revelations, all the rawness and vulnerability that the INFJ finds so compelling. This is the dark side of the INFJ's need for authenticity. They become addicted to the drama of brokenness, to the feeling of being needed in such a fundamental way, to the intensity of emotions that come with loving someone who is falling apart. They mistake this intensity for intimacy, this drama for depth, and they begin to feel bored or disconnected in relationships that are stable, calm, and reciprocal. They sabotage healthy connections because they feel too easy, too shallow, not meaningful enough. They return again and again to broken people because that is where they feel most alive, most purposeful, most themselves. But intensity is not the same as intimacy, and crisis is not the same as depth. Real depth comes from mutual vulnerability, from two people who are both doing the work of healing and growth, who can support each other without one always rescuing and the other always drowning. The INFJ's attraction to broken people is often an attraction to a familiar pattern, one where they can avoid their own healing by focusing on someone else's, where they can feel valuable without having to confront their own worthiness, where they can play the role of the strong one, the wise one, the healer, without ever having to admit that they too are wounded and in need of care. The seventh sign is the INFJ's unconscious martyrdom, their tendency to find identity and worth in suffering for others. This is not conscious, not a deliberate choice, but a pattern so deeply embedded that it feels like truth, like calling, like destiny. The INFJ believes, at a level beneath thought, that their value comes from what they can give, from how much they can endure, from their willingness to sacrifice their own needs for the sake of others. This belief is often formed in childhood, in families where the INFJ learned early that their emotions were too much, their needs inconvenient, and their worth conditional on how well they could manage the emotions of others. They became the emotional caretaker, the one who kept the peace, who absorbed the family's anxiety and fear, who made themselves small so others could be big. And this role, though it caused them pain, also gave them a sense of purpose, a way to matter in a world that often made them feel invisible. Broken people activate the martyr archetype in the INFJ. They offer the INFJ a role, a script, a familiar place where the INFJ knows how to be, knows what is expected, and knows how to find worth, even as they are being destroyed. The relationship becomes a reenactment of childhood dynamics, where the INFJ once again becomes responsible for someone else's emotional survival, and once again sacrifices their own well-being for the illusion of being needed. And the hurt comes not just from the external damage caused by broken people, but from the internal damage of living a life that is not truly yours, of serving a pattern that was written for you by trauma, rather than chosen by your authentic self. The INFJ who attracts broken people is often one who has not yet learned that they are worthy of love without suffering, that they can be valuable without being depleted, and that they can be deep and authentic in relationships that nourish rather than drain them. The wound of the INFJ is not that they attract broken people. The wound is that they believe this is all they deserve, that their sensitivity, their depth, their ability to see into others, is a burden that must be justified through service and sacrifice. They believe that to be loved, they must first be useful, that to matter, they must first be martyred, that their purpose is to descend into the underworld of another's pain and never ask to be rescued themselves. Jung wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. For the INFJ, this means learning to see that their gifts are not meant to be weapons of their own destruction, that their empathy is not meant to erase them, that their ability to love the broken does not require them to hurt themselves. It means learning to close the door they have left open, not out of cruelty but out of self-preservation, to say no to those who will not do their own work, to walk away from relationships that demand everything and offer nothing in return. It means understanding that the wounded healer must first heal themselves, that Chiron's tragedy was not his wound but his refusal to let it be tended, his belief that his pain was the price of his purpose. The INFJ who learns this, who steps back from the pattern of attracting and absorbing broken people, does not become less compassionate or less deep. They become more themselves, more whole, more capable of the kind of love that transforms, rather than destroys. They learn that true healing comes not from fixing others, but from allowing others to see that they, the INFJ, are also human, also struggling, also in need of the very care they have spent a lifetime giving away. And in this recognition, this humble admission of shared vulnerability, they finally find what they have been searching for all along, not in the broken people they attract but in the mirrors those people held up, showing them their own unhealed wounds, their own hunger for acceptance, their own need to be seen not as the healer, but as the human being who also deserves to be healed. If this resonated, if you recognized yourself in these patterns, if you have ever been the wounded healer who forgot they too could bleed, leave a comment below. Share your story, your struggle, your moment of recognition. You are not alone in this. And if you want to continue this exploration, to go deeper into the psychology and mythology of the INFJ experience, subscribe and stay connected. This is not the end of the conversation. It is only the beginning of understanding what it means to reclaim your gifts without sacrificing yourself,